Good morning, Kathryn, and welcome to the Low Carb Paleo Show.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Wonderful, thank you. Absolutely wonderful, if not better.
Are you sunning yourself in Spain?
I am. It's very nice, very pleasant.
All right. So, Kathryn, I met Bridget since you were not at that particular show, and your fermented products at the 2018 Paleo FX event in Austin.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know a little bit about fermentation, but not that much, not enough anyway. So I was intrigued by the power of fermentation. And there you are. So quickly, you are the founder of Farmhouse Culture. Any other role you have there?
Well, I'm an advisor to the company, and I help with innovation, marketing, and sales.
Okay. So you seem to have a very interesting background. Can you tell us how, kind of your professional path, how you got to where you are now?
Yeah. Well, I was in the restaurant business for 23 years, both behind, back of the house and front of the house, in management, and at one point was a food and beverage director in Carmel or Nardis Lodge, and was completely unhappy. I missed being at the stove, and so I went back to school and learned natural chefing, and learned how to ferment there. But if I roll it back just a little bit, I was in Miami Beach managing a restaurant, met my husband, who was German, and we ended up in Stuttgart, Germany, where he was from. And up until that point, I just had front of the house experience, and I had modeled, and that's all I'd ever done. And I fell in love with the kitchen sort of accidentally because I didn't speak German. So I ended up spending more time in the kitchen than in the front of the house. And we hired a really great chef from Strasbourg, and we did very authentic, classic German food. This was in 94 through 98. And I fell in love with it. I realized, okay, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing. And while I was in Germany, we got our schnapps, our house schnapps, and a few other things from a local farmer. And every time we went out there, he and his wife had something new for me to try. And I didn't like sauerkraut at all. Wouldn't eat the stuff when I was a kid. And they introduced me to sauerkraut literally by sticking a fork full of it in my mouth and saying, here, you have to try this, right from their barrel. And I didn't have a chance to say no, and I don't know that I would have anyway. And I loved it. It was like a revelation. I'd never tasted anything quite like it. It didn't taste like the canned stuff that I knew.
No.
Yeah.
And so that sort of piqued my interest, started playing a little bit with sauerkraut in the restaurant, but for the most part, sauerkraut, we cooked it, but I noticed that, especially the chef I was working with, drank sauerkraut juice when he was sick and when he was hungover, which was quite a bit. And so I kind of remembered that, and I knew that it was a superfood, considered a superfood, even in Germany, even though they were pasteurizing it. And so when I learned how to ferment at this natural chef culinary program in California, and we learned how to make sauerkraut, I was like, oh, okay, I remember this. This is the stuff. And up until that point, I really thought that it was just, up until I've actually seen it in the barrel at the farmer's home, I thought it was vinegar and cabbage. I didn't understand the lactic acid, fermentation process. And so I learned that at the Natural Chef Culinary Program, and just immediately was hooked. It was just like, okay, this is interesting. So I started fermenting everything. Kombucha and kimchi and vegetables and miso and sauerkraut, and started buying cabbage from a local farmer where I was. And they said, listen, why don't you consider putting some of that cabbage that you're making into sauerkraut? Why don't you consider putting some of those jars in our CSA box? And I thought, well, okay. And at that time, I really hadn't thought of it as a business. I really wanted to start a teaching farm. I wanted to teach, seed to plate eating. This was, a number of years ago, 3 and 4. So it was, quite a few years ago, and the whole local thing wasn't big yet. So one thing led to another, and I think this was now 2007. I started selling sauerkraut through their CSA, and it just exploded. It just went crazy. And I went, okay, maybe this is a business. There seemed to be a big demand for it. And then there's a part 2 of that story, but I can tell you that in a minute. I don't want to monopolize the entire conversation with my history, but that's sort of how I came to sauerkraut.
Okay, sounds good. So you do have experience as a chef and a food manager. So from a chef's perspective, how do you see gut health? Sorry.
Yeah, well, what I talk about to people a lot is how to incorporate fermented foods into your diet, because I think so many people think of sauerkraut as a condiment to put on your brats or your hot dogs. And so helping people figure out how to use this new flavor profile, whether it's, fermented beets or, sauerkraut or even like sauerkraut juice. I don't know about you, but I learned how to finish sauces and soups with it. We didn't have lemon year round. Lemons were, expensive from Israel at that point, and I'm sure it's probably changed by now. But we needed acidity to finish a dish, and so it's like, wow, it's a fabulous cooking ingredient. And even though you kill the probiotics, from a chef's perspective, it's a pretty amazing ingredient for taste. Yeah. And then you can always add fresh back in. I love to cook with kraut, and then I'll put a little fresh on top of it, so I know I'm getting the probiotics as well. Mm-hmm. Do you cook with it?
No, I don't. Actually, most of my career was a pastry chef. I got into the nutrition side of things about 20 years ago. So I never got to really cook with fermented food. Not to that. I grew up on canned sauerkraut, which was horrible, made me horribly sick. Probably had a bad can, when they didn't pay attention. And ever since, I never touched the stuff until only a few years ago when I tried the locally made real thing, fresh. And like you, it was a revelation. So it's very interesting. And of course, I've tried kombucha. In French, we do cornichon pickles. Typically, they're done the natural way. Not, of course, in America, typically it's done with vinegar or some form of acid. But so I've always liked the flavor of cornichon and, the acidity part of it and the crunchiness. But it was pretty much as far as it went, as far as I was concerned. So this whole fermentation thing, even though, historically it's part of our culinary heritage in France, I never really paid that much attention to it until recently. So how do you incorporate your gut healthy food into your everyday meal?
Well, I just wrote a book with my son on fermentation. And so I, even though our company makes mostly krauts and fermented vegetables, I also make yogurt. I make a lot of things. So, for breakfast, we made fermented salsas in our book. I almost always put fermented salsa on my eggs, or I'll put our smoked jalapeno kraut. We have a ginger beet gut shot. I put that into my smoothies. Salad dressings, for instance, for lunch, I almost always replace half of the vinegar with one of our kraut juices, depending on the flavor I'm going for. One of my favorite things this summer was to make ceviche with kraut juice and lime. So smoked jalapeno kraut juice with lime. Wow. You marinate the fish in that for an hour. It's fabulous, and a lot of cilantro. And then as the day progresses, I usually will just have a shot or two in the afternoon as a pick-me-up instead of a coffee. And I just find that I feel great when I do that. If I have a cold or anything, I always, drink the kraut juice. And then at night, it's always just, a million different ways, but almost always involves some sort of a fermented vegetable. and or yogurt. Like, so a great example is we have a lot of apples in season right now, and so I made a French apple cake yesterday. And then instead of putting whipped cream on it, I had homemade yogurt that I added a little bit of maple syrup and a little bit of brandy too. And that's what I put on the French apple cake. And I think I digest it better. I don't eat many sweets. But I just feel like when I eat something like that, it's like a lead weight in my belly. I just don't do well with sweets. But if I put the yogurt with it, it seems to do. I don't seem to have that sort of response to it.
It kind of sounds like almost like creme fraiche.
Yeah.
Creme fraiche is fermented.
Yeah.
Creme fraiche, the real creme fraiche, not the pasteurized version, is a fermented cream.
Right.
That is allowed to ferment. And one thing I do remember is, I wouldn't call it fermented, but when I used to do ice cream, I was always taught to let it age at least 24 hours to allow all the enzymes to start working and feeding on the sugar and create a more rounded flavor in the ice cream.
Before you churned it or after you churned it?
Before we churned it, yeah. Before we freeze.
In the refrigerator or sitting out?
No, we cook. I mean, we cook it, we cool it, and then we let it sit in the refrigerator. Yeah, we cannot leave it outside because that's dairy, so you can't. But refrigerate overnight. I learned that from the Le Notre school in Paris.
That's really interesting.
Because I don't know if you know Le Notre, but it's one of the, well-known worldwide pastry catering company, at least in France and in some part of the world. But anyway, why don't you finish what you started as far as your personal story, and then we'll move on to serious subjects.
Okay, all right. So summer of 2008, I was really involved with slow food movement. I was interested in using local flavors as much as I could. And so I'd created a smoked jalapeno sauerkraut and a apple fennel sauerkraut that reminded me of my time in Germany, and a horseradish leek sauerkraut, and then a classic kraut. And Slow Food Nation was happening in San Francisco, and Alice Waters spearheaded it. And it was a Labor Day weekend, and it was very hard to get any products into the event. They had like an Italian style farmers market. I think they accepted 63 vendors. And I had read that summer that they have an arc of taste. Are you familiar with that? The slow food arc of taste. Their food's in danger of going extinct, and fresh sauerkraut at that time was in danger of going extinct. So I thought, maybe they will accept one of my krauts. Well, they did. I was very lucky. They accepted the smoked jalapeno sauerkraut. You just got to bring one flavor. And I was at this point making it in my neighbor's basement. And so I thought, I was very excited. I thought, I'm going to make enough for the season, since I'm buying my first barrels. I'd just been doing it in 5-gallon buckets at that point. Buying my first barrels, I'm going to make enough for the season and take it down. I was living up by Yosemite at that point. I was taking a year off to sort of develop the business plan and the recipes and everything. So anyway, we had a terrible heat wave right before the event. I mean, a terrible heat wave. I had ice taped around my barrels and losing my mind. So I thought, they've got refrigeration down there in San Francisco. So I'm going to bring my entire supply down with me. And thank goodness I did, because we handed out 8,000 samples and sold 1,000 pounds of smoked jalapeno sauerkraut. And the food editor for the San Francisco Chronicle at the time said it was the best thing she tasted at the event. I think it blew everybody away because sauerkraut just wasn't a thing. Yeah. And then putting smoked jalapenos with it was weird. And it was just really unique. It really caught the attention of the media. And Whole Foods, a local forager for Whole Foods markets, put his business card down on my at my booth and said, when you're ready, come see me. And that was sort of okay, all right. So I'm from Santa Cruz, California, and I decided, okay, it's time to go home, rent a proper facility and get this business going. And it really did take off. At one point we were doing 14 farmers markets a week all around the Bay Area. And I think within a few months we were in Whole Foods, the first one they opened in Santa Cruz. And then, next thing you know, we were nationwide, and it was craziness. There was just so much interest in it. And yeah, there you have it. Just
well, that's a great story.
It was good. The right time, the right idea at the right time.
So moving on to more intense subject. If you've done a little research on me, you know that I am anti-GMO, and I wrote a book on the subject. And it seems like lately the subject has shifted a little bit away from GMOs to glyphosate. What's your take on glyphosate, and how does it affect your gut?
So I have noticed for a number of years that when I eat wheat in the United States, I don't do well. I get achy, I get bloated. So I, for the most part, don't eat wheat products. But every time I go to Germany or Austria, I eat the pastries there. I don't have that same experience. That's interesting. So I didn't think too much about it. I do tend to go, when I'm there, I do tend to go to this one slow food bakery. So I think they're using organic, but who knows? In any event, I started learning about glyphosates through Dr. Zach Bush. And he spoke with me at a couple of events. We've spoken together, and he's the one who was one of the first I'd heard talk about glyphosates in the gut. And he shows very elegantly, what's happening and how it's causing leaky guts. And I, in the book that my son and I have written, found a graph that correlates gluten sensitivity with the increased use of glyphosate when harvesting wheat. So we've been using it for a long time, right? It's Roundup Ready. But when they paired it with a GMO, and I think that's where it became more potent, right? But then they started soaking our crops, a number of crops, not just wheat, with it the day before harvest to get the crops to lay down for the swathers, and as they come through to harvest. And there's a direct correlation. I actually pulled the graph from Dr. Perlmutter's website, and he's the one who's, I think, wrote The Brain Game, and a lot of things about wheat and glyphosates. And so really it's not, it's not causative, but it's a really interesting correlation to see the gluten sensitivity and the heavier use of glyphosate really parallel each other. So I think there's enough evidence to suggest that we need to really dig into this and get these nasty chemicals out of our food system. When I interviewed Dr. Bush for my book, it was a little depressing. He said, the problem is that we are so saturated with glyphosates in our environment that they're in our air, they're in our water, they're everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, we have to get them out of the system. Eating organic is absolutely the first thing you have to do, but we need to work towards getting them out of our system entirely. And that's something I'm really interested in. And we're, 100% organic. All of our products are 100% organic. I've always been very passionate about that.
Right. And of course, in California, it's perfectly how do you say this? To use a German word, Zeitgeist, right, in California.
Genau.
Yeah. Okay. Learning something new every day. On a more personal note, and you said it was okay to mention that, I understand you have sorry, I have a hard time pronouncing rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah. I haven't really talked about that publicly, and I think I'm going to start talking about it. I was diagnosed in 2011. I started my business in 2008, and I've been seeing a functional doctor, and I'm trying to figure out why me. I'm like the healthiest girl in the world. Well, my grandmother had it. Mm-hmm. And the distinction between rheumatoid and osteoarthritis is rheumatoid is an autoimmune, where the immune system turns on itself and starts attacking the connective tissue.
Okay.
And I was really, really sick for about a year. Tried everything natural, and of course, did a ton of fermented foods and bone broths and a lot of kale, and just did everything I could, threw everything at it I could, and couldn't back it down. So I actually went on the immune suppressing drugs, and that allowed me to keep working. I was really at that point almost disabled. So, it's been an interesting journey. It's been 7 years, and I have times when I don't take the drugs for a couple of years at a time, but then I end up having to take them again. But what I absolutely notice is if I stick to organic, I stay away from grains. I eat mostly paleo. I mean, I would say I'm more keto than paleo now. I stay pretty focused on my relationship between fat, protein, and carbs. If I stay focused on that and I'm really eat cleanly, I can go a lot longer without having to take any of the drugs.
Okay,
If I start to cheat, then I'm back on the drugs.
Yeah, this is what I was hoping for, is some advice on how to, for other people with this condition, how to control it, or at least reduce it. Any additional advice on that?
Everybody's so individual, and some people have all the symptoms, but and clearly have rheumatoid arthritis, but they don't test positively. So I don't. Everybody's got a little different way of. I don't think we understand it enough in order to fully be able to. Excuse me. Let me back that up. I don't think we understand it enough. It's so individual. I feel reluctant to give advice, but I do know that the number one thing anybody with RA needs to do is eliminate sugar and grains.
Right.
We already know that acidifies the body. So if you can get an alkalized, body somehow, I think that can help tremendously. And I do believe that there's a good chance. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor, but it does seem to me that, I have a leaky gut, and it could be environmental. I mean, I've been eating organic almost my entire life. But for some reason, something's happening in my body. So I think one of the first things you have to do is heal your gut if you've got any kind of autoimmune. And there are two ways to do that. And I think the one we're going to hear a lot about in the coming years is fiber. Jeff Leach and Rob Knight, who founded the American Gut Project, which I really love. You can support them by taking their test. They'll do a profile on your microbiome and your gut microbiome, and that money goes to fund a lot of the work that they're doing. And they've studied indigenous tribes around the world, but mostly in South America and in Africa. And the thing that they've noticed with these hunter-gatherer cultures is that they don't have any of our modern diseases. They die of infectious diseases, and they maybe get killed by a lion or whatever, but they don't have any of our modern diseases. And one of the things that we notice with both cultures that they've studied is a lot of fiber.
Right.
A ton of fiber, like twice as much, 3 times, 10 times as much. I mean, it's just crazy how much fiber they eat. And so I think, from what I understand, by putting a lot of good fiber in your gut, and there's definitely a process of getting used to it. It's not always comfortable to begin with. The bacteria that help form the mucosal lining and the epithelial lining of your gut, they need that resistant starch from these fiber-rich foods in order to produce more of themselves and create a nice healthy lining. So you've got to have fiber. And then we also know that this is a very interesting thing I learned in the interview with Dr. Zach Bush, that fermented foods seem to have, and apple cider vinegar too, seem to have a pretty positive effect on the gut, especially when glyphosates are introduced. Pretty fascinating information coming out around this. Again, I'm reluctant to give anybody, medical advice, But
Right, yeah.
I think fiber, high fiber, and a lot of fermented foods it seems to be a winning combination for me and for a lot of others.
The fiber is the prebiotics that feeds the friendly bacteria.
Yeah, and so, people think, oh, a salad's high fiber. It's not. Lettuce is not high fiber. And then people always want to go to like grains for fiber. Mm-hmm. But you can get fiber in a lot of different ways. I love cassava because I can make tapioca pudding with coconut milk and a little maple syrup. But we've been eating cassava for a long time, thousands of years. And then acacia, coffee flour, green banana flour. These are all things you can add to your smoothies. What else? Cold rice, cold potatoes. I don't do well with nightshades, so I stay away from potatoes. I can't remember why cold is important, but something switches and it makes it more of a resistant starch than a straight starch. And so the body metabolizes it that way. So there are a lot of different ways to get resistant starch for those bugs in your gut that form that mucosal lining. Okay,
so any green vegetables in that family?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that they're that high in fiber, but of course they're really good for you. So yeah, ton of vegetables, super important, especially if you're doing paleo, right? Because we're not doing really any grains. So you've got to be mindful about how to get roughage into your gut. So a ton of vegetables.
So for our listeners that are not familiar with the keto diet, can you give us your version of it?
Yeah, well, the way I understand the difference between paleo and keto, because I get asked that a lot, and I'm sure you do too, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, but paleo is more focused on the actual ingredients, reducing anything that we didn't eat as a hunter-gatherer. So no dairy, no grains, no processed foods, mostly meats, different types of meats and vegetables. Where keto, like I do dairy, I do fermented dairy. Keto is more about the relationship between the macronutrients. So for instance, I eat about 70% fat, about 18% protein, and then about 12% carbs. So I will measure, I know how to do it now by just looking at it, but I measure my food to make sure I'm getting, a certain number of calories 4 times a day. And I try to get that ratio. So that's my understanding. Do you think that's about right?
Actually, I wouldn't call myself an expert in the keto diet. It's from a nutritionist point of view, I see keto diet useful for people with certain conditions. But if people are in regular health, they are healthy in general, I don't recommend it. I think it's a little too extreme for my taste. I'm more into balanced diet,
Yeah.
So in my particular case, I increased the amount of fat in my diet, my paleo diet, but I don't go to the extreme of keto because I'm generally healthy and, I don't feel the need for. So yes, I would add butter or coconut oil in my hot chocolate in the morning. I'm sorry. I have had this. Probably something in there, this throat thing. I don't do dairy, so it's not the dairy. And so I added a little more. I take a tablespoon of coconut oil in the morning as a, addition, but that's basically it. I don't go, necessarily in that direction. I'm more like a paleo. Not like very strict, but probably 90% paleo with a little extra push on the fat, but that's it.
That's a big shift from pastry, huh?
Yeah. The joke is I call all my old pastry customer, and then get them well again.
There you go. I have to tell you, Alain, that I came this close to becoming a pastry chef.
Yeah.
I love to bake, and I love I love chocolate work, and I came so close. Instead of going to the natural chef culinary program, I was going to go back to school and learn pastry.
Well, there's a saying.
I think it would have killed me. There's
not really. I'm still alive. You know, the thing with me is that I love my trade, but I never really enjoyed sweets as a matter of, eating them. I mean, I would love a good fruit tart or a sorbet or something like this, but I'm not I'm not into chocolate, for example, which sounds surprising for a pastry chef. In France, we tend to be more focused on balance again, and typically the pastries are not very sweet, and the flavors are much more balanced. There's a combination of flavors, and neither one is allowed to overcome the others. So it's kind of a symphony of flavors in there instead of being the sugar being number one hitting you, which typically kills all the other flavors. So French pastries typically are, surprisingly enough, for a lot of people, because they think, oh, French pastries, they're not really that sweet. And typically French people, when they eat a pastry, it's a small amount. It's a small serving. It's about, I don't know, an eclair or a small slice of. They don't typically eat a big slice of cake, like is typically done in this country. So it's a different look at things. And since I was, most of my career, I mean, I was a pastry chef, but I was also a cake decorator. So my trade was mostly into making cake beautiful and not necessarily putting them together or baking them or cooking them. I mean, yes, I had to do all of this to become a cake decorator, but for me, what was the most pleasant part of my job was the cake decorating part, the artful, creative side of things.
Yeah, that's the part I was attracted to also.
Yeah, to be honest with you, production bores me to death. Having to do the same thing every day, day in, day out, because when you start working in some large, even fairly large pastry shop where they have 20, 30 people in the kitchen, you tend to be, they tend to put you in certain area of the kitchen. So you work, breakfast pastries, you work breads, you work cookies, you work, pastries, cakes, chocolate, ice cream, a different department. I was lucky to be allowed to be what we call a tournant, which is you get to rotate. I was allowed to rotate and learn different skills through the kitchen, but eventually I ended up as a cake decorator, and that's what I like the most. So that's basically it. So yeah, I'm well-rounded pastry chef, but my skills lay more into decoration.
Do you doing paleo then? Do you ever eat bread or anything like that?
Rarely. I splurge in social occasions. Sometimes I'll eat bread and cheese, as long as the bread is good. If it's crappy bread, I won't touch it. And once in a while, I'll eat a slice of sourdough bread, a good quality sourdough bread, just as a treat. That with a good butter on it, and that's almost like dessert for me. But it's not something strangely enough, I don't even crave it anymore. I don't go out of my way to go eat croissant or pastries or danishes or anything like this. If it happens to be there, then yeah, I'll get one. And I'm not, ashamed of it. It's just, part of the paleo diet is you're allowed to cheat a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's my cheat. But it's to come to think of it, I'm actually cheating more with corn chips than I'm cheating with pastries. Because I like the salty. I like the salty and the crunchy.
Yeah.
Much more than the smooshy and the sweet of the pastry.
Yeah. So do I.
But as a medicine, I do take a square of dark chocolate every night. That's my
medicine. You do?
Yeah.
Good for you.
Well, my excuse is it's got
excuse me,
a good amount of antioxidants. That's that's why I call it my medicine.
Do you take it with red wine?
No, I don't. I don't like the combination. I don't like the combination of red wine because the chocolate I eat is fairly bitter, and then you top it off with red wine. It's just the flavors are clashing, in my opinion.
You need a good port.
And I get, I don't drink hard liquors, so I wouldn't know. I never tried, I never experimented, never tried champagne, for example, with chocolate. But I get the feeling, but that's just a feeling. I was going to say a gut feeling that it might not work together. I'm not, strangely enough, again, as a Frenchman, I don't drink wine. If I do, it's just a glass and with food, with a meal, with food, not with dessert. But I don't mind a glass of champagne with a nice piece of cake, once in a while as my birthday or something, some special occasion. But I really don't. I found that sugar gags me pretty fast. I'm to that point where if I eat a little excess sugar, I get sick to my stomach, kind of nauseous. So it's not. Even when I was a kid or younger, I never was really attracted to sweets very much. Strangely enough, for a pastry chef. So probably again, my focus was on cake decorating, and that's what I was good at, and I stay with it, And when I opened my own business 30 years ago, I obviously had to produce everything. I was being the chef. I was still the cake decorator, and my assistants were taking care of the rest mostly. But that's when I started to become interested in nutrition, because a couple of my assistants were vegan, and they complained I didn't have any vegan dishes. It's like, what's that? In France, you don't separate foods. You don't compartmentalize in vegan or meat eating or this or that, and there's not 24 different diets available. You just eat food. That's it. We don't exert a lot of energy trying to calculate anything. We just eat what's on the plate, and that's it. And typically our mothers and grandmothers were good cooks, and they serve what they got from the market, so fresh typically, before all the supermarkets and hypermarkets and all of this started to happen. I grew up with my grandmother on her farm. All we had to eat was coming out of her garden, which was 20 feet away. So we just go there, pick some carrots, keep some salads, and once in a while grab a chicken or a rabbit and cook it, and that was food.
That's right.
There's no concept of diets. Nobody cared about diets. You just ate food.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, if you lived in Germany, you're probably aware of this particular way of looking at things.
Yeah, also, my grandparents, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents when I was a child, and we had a Black Angus ranch. And my grandfather was a canner. I know what farm life is like. Summers were filled with gardening and canning, and unfortunately not fermenting. I don't know why we didn't ferment. And so I understand that. And I think we wouldn't be talking about vegan or paleo or keto or any of this had we not industrialized our food system. And when I started the business, truly, I used to tell even people in business meetings, this is my prayer for the world. I was not out just to make fermented foods. It was about transforming the food industry, because they weren't listening to consumers. Consumers are getting sick. They're putting more crap in their food. And I thought, you know what, instead of me being angry about this, I am going to go beat them at their own game. I'm going to go create products that taste good, that consumers will choose over some of this other stuff that's available. And a year and a half ago, General Mills invested in my company.
Wow.
And they have a venture capital arm of their company called 301 Inc. And they assembled some of the brightest, most passionate young people I've ever met to go out and look for companies like mine, potentially to invest in, not to buy, to invest in, to help us grow, to help us give us access to some of their intellectual capacity that we don't have, for instance, innovation, especially with fermentation, because fermentation is very exacting, and it's well, not exacting, that's not the right word. There's a lot of science that goes into making sure that the microbes live throughout the shelf life. And so we have access to their labs now in Minneapolis, and they've helped us with distribution. But what's interesting about General Mills is that they're a 150-year-old company. They've got a lot of products that I would never buy, but they're transitioning a lot of them. They're transitioning a lot of them into natural ingredients. They recognize that there's a problem, and they're listening to consumers. And I think they've invested something like 9 companies like mine, 3 of them female founded. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I read recently that General Mills sells more organic food than, well, they're in the top 2 organic food sellers in the world. Like, what? People don't realize it, and they have put a ton of money. I think this is the right number, that they have converted more conventional land to organic than any other company in the world.
Which is a credit to the power of the people, because the people demanded that, and it's also to their credit that they actually listen.
Right. Which
is not typically the case in corporations. They typically don't care. They only care about money.
That's right. So it's kind of a thing now that these big corporations that a lot of us small guys set out to beat are now coming to us and wanting to invest in us and give us sort of the business part, because we bring the passion and the food knowledge.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting what's happening, and it makes me optimistic that somehow we can get back to a sane food system, because, I remember I remember what it's like we got milk delivered to us, I don't know. I think I was probably always maybe I wasn't going to have rheumatoid arthritis, but it's hereditary in my family.
I can beat you. I was sent every morning with my pail to go to the farm and get milk almost still warm from the cow. Yeah.
We used to do that too. In the summer, and if you're going to do dairy, then it should maybe be raw and fermented. And, it's not unusual. Like, I spent some time in Hungary with a good friend of mine, and, his mother, they actually, outside of Budapest, she lives in this village, they have a raw milk machine outside of the grocery store. Wow. So you show up with your bottle, and for 25 cents, you get a liter of fresh raw milk. It's a cooperative. And if you hear his mother talk about it, it's like, oh yeah, it's all clean, because, in Hungary, let's face it, they're not, sorry for any Hungarians, I love it there, but they're not super regulated. And, but there's self-regulation, because the community knows if somebody's being dirty with their dairy. It gets out. So that's the beauty of a smaller food system, is transparency is just part of it. And then she would leave the milk out on the counter overnight, raw, and then in the morning is when she would use it. They never drank it just straight. They would let the bacteria start to partially digest the sugars, the lactose sugars. And then they would drink it the next day, and it was mildly sour, and that's really interesting. And she made all kinds. She made a type of creme fraiche. They made a type of cheese, a fresh cheese, yogurt. It's like, wow. So dairy can, if you've got the genes, and I do, to manage dairy, if it's done right, if it's done the way nature intended, it can be infinitely healthy, I think, for people.
That's an interesting part to comment, because when I was a kid, I never had problem with dairy, and I come to America and I'm lactose intolerant. Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So it's either in the way they produce the milk that affects my digestive system, or because I understand that when you get older, you tend to become more sensitive to lactose, as aging goes. But I don't know. It's just I go back to France and I drink raw milk, and I don't have a problem with it. And I trust them to. But it's getting more and more difficult, because now, especially in Europe, they do this, ultra high temperature UHT, cottons, which is horrible. It's even worse than what they do here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
It's awful.
it's just basically colored water. It's nothing more than that. So instead I drink, almond milk. But if I get the chance to visit a farm, or if I get access to a farmer's market that has actual raw milk, I drink it straight up, and I don't have any problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's
we have,
definitely
you can still buy raw milk in France in the supermarket.
you can.
You can. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was in Nice last Christmas, I didn't see it. I didn't look for it, for one thing, but the small market that was near where I was staying didn't have it. I know that much. But then for probably the larger one, they may have it, yes.
Have you paid much attention to the A1, A2 gene cows and their milk?
Nope.
There's a discussion about that going on too, that cows from Southern Europe have a gene that produce milk that's easier to digest. Okay. And for some reason, these Northern European cattle are hardier, and so we've sort of shifted to them. And the mostly, I think 100% of the cattle in the United States are this other gene that's more difficult to digest. So that's a discussion, but I don't know how much of that is relevant. I don't know. When we start when we start genetically modifying everything, it's hard to know sometimes how far you have to look back to get to okay, what was the real original source of what this food was supposed to look like. In California, raw milk is still legal, and but I live in Nevada, just over the border. So I'm able to get raw milk from a farmer's market that's about a 30-minute drive from me. And you can buy into a share of a cow, and then you can get, share. I don't need a whole gallon of milk. I need like a quart of milk a week. I live by myself. And so, I'll turn that into yogurt or, whatever. I don't really drink milk. I typically ferment it. And I feel very blessed that I have access to that, because otherwise I just don't want to do dairy.
Right. What's interesting in your comment is that when you say southern cows, you mean like Southern Europe, like France and Italy, because they don't really have that many. I would say that cows stopped happening around Lyon in France. That's probably because in the south of France, there's no room for cows. There's just not food for them. So typically they rely more on sheep and goat milk, traditionally, until, of course, trucking or refrigeration and all of that. So I can see where northern, like Germany, maybe Holland, and all the Swedish countries, they would need cows that would be much more hardy, like you said. They will resist the cold, and compared to the southern cows. But I'm not sure how that affects us and I suspect that over the years, the population will adapt to these different kind of milks, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's something I'm just starting to learn about. I just know enough to be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I am fascinated by it. And so what you'll get a kick out of this. I don't know if you're familiar with a brand of yogurt and milk now called Saint Benoit.
No.
So from Petaluma, California, Benoit de Corsac, I don't know if I'm saying it right. Known him for a number of years. He started our business. He started his business maybe a year before I did. The best yogurt from Jersey cows, full fat, beautiful, grass fed, 100% on grass. Just the most stunning dairy of all time. I love French yogurt. I love the French strains.
Yeah.
And anyway, he's an interesting guy. The company got so popular and started growing so fast that he said, it's too much. So he sold it to a French company, and he moved not far from where I am. Right. And he just bought a couple of cows, and his wife makes gluten-free pastries, and they are just back to the simple life again of selling for what they need at the farmer's market, and he's got
Right.
his piece back. I just love that story because Benoit chose, I'm sure he made a little bit of money off the sale of his company, but he didn't want to be, he's a dairyman, he's a
Yeah,
yogurt maker.
yeah.
He's not a businessman. And
No, he's a
I love that.
dairyman, a farmer. He's not he's not into the American business mentality of growing,
No.
and that's something I know something about. I made that mistake, and like him, I wanted to grow, and that's when I lost my business. Believing the American dream. I feel that you and I could have discussions forever on all these different subjects. Actually, you make me feel like missing friends right now. So I'd love to continue that discussion another time, but right now we have a show to do. So I understand you're working on the book.
Yeah. So my son and I wrote a book. My son, Shane Peterson, he had written a book in Denmark, I think I mentioned, and so he knew a little bit about it. But he also was our fermentologist for the company. As we grew, I had to start wearing lots of different hats. And so he was able to sort of continue with the fermentation and take a much deeper dive into it than I could. So he's really sort of the science guy now. So I write recipes. I'm the flavor person. And he's been at my side cooking with me since he was old enough to pull up a chair to the counter. And so we just, when it came time to write a book, it was like, yeah, we should do this together. Yeah. I don't know that we'll do it again. We get along really well, but it's hard writing a book with somebody because we have different opinions, about everything.
That's why I prefer to write alone.
Yeah, I think Shane and I will both focus on that. He's writing a book on sacred herbal beers. He's really interested in non-pasteurized ales, wines, and beers with herbs and not hops and things like that. So that's where his passion is taking him. And so anyway, but this book, we include everything from, fermented vegetables, and get into yogurt, get into all the different milks. I do almond milk yogurts and chia milk yogurts and things like that. And then get into kombucha, and we even get into mead, do a lot of pickles, hot sauces. And so it's 10 Speed Press is our publisher. Right. And it comes out in the summer of 2019. Just finished all the photography, and then we have one more round of edits to do, I think, and then it goes to the graphic designer. So it's quite a process. It's quite exciting. I really have enjoyed it. It
is. My books are much more simpler, no pictures, just words, and they self-publish. I self-publish all my books. So we would like to have you back when the book is out, so we can talk some more about it. Is that something?
I would love that. I would love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that comes to mind as far as, fermentation or any similar subjects?
Well, one thing that I'm really passionate about, just on a sort of a closing note, is we're talking about keeping businesses small. But one of the reasons I wanted to scale my business is because I want that single mom in Detroit to have access. She can't afford the $10 pound of kraut. I want to get kraut down to $5 a pound for her. And I think helping women understand the importance of nutrition for their kids without shaming them, and helping making healthy food available to them so they can afford to eat these healthy foods. I would really like to see a shift in our consciousness culturally, and maybe even at the government level. Maybe that's asking too much right now, but eventually that's where I really would like to see this go. I feel like women have a lot of power as consumers, and what they feed their families really creates our culture. That's something I'm thinking a lot about, and I'm hoping that our products are affordable enough for them, and if not, that the book is there to show them how to do it at home.
Right. There's a pun in there.
Yes. Culture.
Mom and culture.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing we've been telling our listeners forever, is that you have the power. You decide what you want for your family. So our job with the show is to educate people so they can go out and make the right choices for them and their family, and within within the budget, because we understand that not everyone is living in California and making a good living, and there's a lot of people on the budget, and it's not easy sometimes to eat healthy when your budget is very limited. So I appreciate your concerns regarding, but your book also will help some of these moms, and typically they're very busy surviving, so it might not be easy, but they can do their own fermenting as well.
Yeah, there's nothing easier than making a batch of sauerkraut, and it costs a couple of bucks, and it'll last you it'll last you a couple months. So there are ways to definitely incorporate it into your life, even though I know you're right though, these people are really busy, right?
I mean, I know I grew up with a single mom of 3, so she didn't have time to cook. I was doing the cooking for the family. And that's how I got into this whole field. I'm pretty much done here on my side. Can you tell us what to look for or where to look for regarding your products and your upcoming book? I don't know if you have anything up there already, but
yeah. So our products you can find all over the country. In the United States, we also are recently in Mexico. Some of our products are in Australia, and a lot of our products are in Canada. And we're pretty widely distributed. And Whole Foods and co-ops and natural markets and gourmet stores. But we're going into Walmart here pretty soon.
Oh wow!
With all of our products, and
even Walmart is going organic.
Yeah. So at first I had mixed feelings about it, but I'm like, no, that's the way we're going to get it to everybody. I want people to have these good bacteria for their guts. We've got to start healing guts before we can heal anything else. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And then I don't have a whole lot of information yet about the book, other than it's coming out next summer. I think it might even be up on Amazon, but I don't think you can pre-order it yet, and I don't think we even have a cover yet. But it'll be with 10 Speed Press, and they're a publisher out of San Francisco that we're really super happy to be working with.
I'd be glad to trade one of my books with one of yours.
Oh yeah, of course. I'm also on Instagram at Kathryn Lukas, my name spelled. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on there. And then I don't do Facebook much. I just can't help it. I just don't like it. But I do love Instagram. I try to post there regularly. And Farmhouse Culture is also on Instagram. So good places to kind of follow along and see what we're up to.
And the website is?
farmhouseculture.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, your turn.
Well, actually, I've been listening fascinated. So my sort of thoughts about questions I was going to ask have gone straight out the window.
I thought you went and took a nap.
I thought it was boring you, Mark.
You've got up lightly to go, Kathryn.
I thought maybe you went, took a nap and...
No. Well, I mean, from her own mouth, we've been interviewing somebody who's dangerous. So, I've got to pay attention. No, I mean, you've really sort of covered a whole gambit of things, Kathryn. Thank you for that. All interesting stuff, hence my lack of questions. So when we have you back, I shall not listen so hard and write some questions for you, some hard ones.
Okay.
Super hard ones.
Okay, all right. I'll do my best.
Looks to me you charmed Mark here, because typically he always has questions. So there's something that went in there. You what's the word for it? Whatever. It'll come back to me. So unless you want to add something else, I can do the closing, and then we'll take it from there.
The only thing I would say is that I watched some of your shows, and I think you guys are doing really great work. So thank you for that. I think it's important that we have voices like yours out here helping people understand, sort of how do we get back to real food and how to heal ourselves. So thank you for the good work you're doing.
It's our pleasure. You can blame Mark for that. He's the instigator, the troublemaker.
Thank you, Mark.
He's the one that got me. He had to twist my arm severely for me to be involved. I'm not very comfortable typically in, talking
In the setting.
in public and all that stuff. So it took, we first went sound only, and after about 6 months, he convinced me to be on camera, which is definitely something I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
he
well,
can be.
It doesn't show.
He can be very persuasive. Well, what makes a big difference is, I guess, because I'm passionate about I've always been a teacher, and I'm passionate about teaching and telling people, or trying to transmit our, through our guests and through our own knowledge, educate people into proper way of staying healthy. And not just on the food side, we deal with food, but sometimes we also have, people that talk about sleep or meditation or, cancer survivors and things like that. So we're not partial to, we even had a couple of vegans on the show. I know for paleo people, it's like, oh my God, how could you do that? You're betraying us. The whole concept is, where we come from is, as long as we can expose our listeners to someone that can explain how they heal or help themselves through diet or through food, we don't care where they come from,
Yeah.
As long as we don't talk politics or religion, stay away from that, and the rest we'll handle.
Yeah.
So I'll do my famous closing now.
Okay.
Just warm up my laugh. Hold on a sec. There we go. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Thank you again, Kathryn, for being on the Low Carb Paleo show. And as we say in Texas, à votre santé, y'all.
It's my pleasure. It's wonderful talking to both of you.